and welcome back to RPMbassy. Today we're talking about a band in their 20th year since forming and their 11th album, and we are talking about Dance Gavin Dance with their 11th album, Pantheon, released on the 12th of September this year. So, as I said, 11th album. This is their first album with Andrew Wells as their lead vocalist, so this is following a lot of upheaval within the band. We'll go very briefly into their history as a band. So 2007 you have Downtown Battle Mountain with lead vocalist Johnny Craig. 2008 you have the self-titled album, or better known as Death Star to the fans because of the cover art, with Kurt Travis as lead vocalist. Then you have Happiness in 2009 with Kurt Travis as vocalist. Then 2011 you have Downtown Battle Mountain 2 with Johnny Craig back as lead vocalist. 2013 you have Acceptance Speech with Tillian Pearson as lead vocalist. And then Tillian stays in the band for essentially the next 12 or 11 or 12 years or so. So you have 2013's Acceptance Speech, 2015's Instant Gratification, 2016's Mothership, 2018's Artificial Selection, 2020's Afterburner, and 2022's Jackpot Juicer. And in 2022 is when a lot of the sort of dramas happened within the band. So first of all you had the bassist Tim Feerick, he passed away, and then not long after there were some allegations levelled against Tillian Pearson, which we won't delve into, but he left the band for a time and then came back towards the end of the year, start of the year after, in 2023. And then in 2024 he was let go permanently from the band. And Andrew Wells, who previously had been the sort of touring guitarist and kind of backing singer for the band, he stepped into the frontman position in 2024. They released 2 singles, and then that sort of then came up to releasing this album this year with all new music. So yeah, it's a bit of a tumultuous career trajectory. Throughout this time you've also had Will Swan, the guitarist, and Matt Mingus, the drummer. They have been the only constants in this band since the very start. And you've also got long-time member John Mess as an unclean vocalist. And he has been on every release except for 2009's Happiness. Everything else he has been on aside from that one album. So lots gone on, and this is kind of a fresh start for the band, kind of a chance for them to repose and work out what they're doing. It's also the longest gap between any 2 albums, which 3 years is nothing really, but you know, for this band 3 years is an age, because they're normally going, well, as you saw with the list of albums, 18 months, maybe 2 years at most. So yeah, initially I was a little bit worried about this album. The first single released from this album was Midnight and McGuffey's. That came out in May of this year, and I didn't really warm up to it at first, and it took a while for me to get it. Part of me worried that perhaps because of Andrew Wells' vocal range, he wasn't going to be able to sort of stand up next to Tillian's performance, because Tillian had, you know, this very high tenor vocal approach, which I think, you know, for the band, saw them into a lot of success really. You know, it's a very poppy approach, and Andrew has more of that kind of soulful, kind of a baritone kind of vocal. But Andrew's vocals do remind me a lot of Kurt Travis on the second and third albums, and so there was part of me that was sort of hopeful. And over time, Midnight and McGuffey's really, I did warm to it, and now that the album is out, Midnight and McGuffey's really does make sense why they picked that as the lead single, because it is a very good summation of how this album sounds, the musicality, the way they're still unmistakably them, but they're trying new things. They're giving John Mess more of a forefront position, because previously it very much felt like John Mess was the second vocalist to Tillian Pearson's lead vocals, whereas now it feels like John Mess and Andrew Wells are on a level playing field. They are both co-lead vocalists. And John Mess gets to play around with some clean vocals, which is basically never done before, aside from like a couple of side project things. And Andrew Wells gets to dabble in some unclean vocals, which Tillian could never really do, and when he did do it on album, it was never replicated live. So putting it on here, knowing that Andrew can replicate it live based on the times where he did cover for Gavin Dance and stuff in his other band, Idola, really, really exciting to see this kind of like new phase for the band. Other tracks on here, it's going to be hard to sort of pick out any one individual because they are all really good. And after giving this album a listen, this is one of their stronger ones. I don't know whether or not I would say it's their best, because for me, the self-titled / Death Star that's always been my favourite album. That was that album that got me into the band. But this is remarkably solid. Yeah, phenomenal work. Animal Surgery, an amazing opener, that kind of like ambient synth beginning, and then, you know, that surge. To be fair, that could be one of the best openers that they've ever done. They're one of the best first tracks on an album. Really excellent way to start the album. It feels like they're back with a ton of energy. They have a lot of references back to previous vocal lines on other albums, and yeah, it feels like they're really kind of firing on all cylinders, and there's like a frenetic energy that perhaps wasn't there over the past couple of albums. Conqueror Worm, great stuff. John Mess gets to employ this like really cool, it's still an unclean vocal technique but with notes, and he has that all over this album. But Conqueror Worm, he does the end part. It feels slightly silly. It feels very John Mess. You know, if you know his lyricism, you know that there's a level of like humour and silliness to all of it, and it's so fitting with him. Strawberry's Daughters, this is where Andrew Wells in sort of the bridge section gets to throw on his unclean vocal hat, and it sounds amazing. Like, his technique is so different from John Mess, so it's not like they're not blending together. They are their own entities in that aspect, and it's really nice. Space Cow Initiation Ritual, got a feature from George Clinton, so, you know, legendary funk vocalist, and I imagine probably Will Swan is over the moon for that, because his approach to songwriting has a lot of that funk influence. And while they've always been a post-hardcore band, you know, his approach to songwriting essentially spawned the subgenre of swancore, and, you know, that kind of funky influence is really a big part of it. So I imagine this was probably a career highlight for Will Swan, having George Clinton on here. And the bridge section, or I guess the sort of middle eight after the chorus section that John Mess has on here, I would say is one of the best vocal performances he's had in his entire career. Like, technically, he is at another level on this. He's always been a vocalist who is hard to replicate and is so unique. But that, you know, he's essentially rapping while screaming, while carrying a tune. That is a great track to check out if you want to see him at his best. Peak of Superstition. This was, when I first listened to the album, Peak of Superstition was the one where I knew that Andrew was like the one that was meant to be in the band this time round. Like, you know, the worries of him not being able to carry the range or have that kind of same poppy approach that Tillian had, that they all went away when I listened to Peak of Superstition. The chorus on there, he's amazing. The part where he like sings in the dead of the night, it's got enough kind of belt to it where it sounds emotional, but there's no kind of death notes to it or anything like that. And it does remind me a lot of probably their most sort of popular mainstream album, Instant Gratification, where like Tillian was kind of like really, that's where he came into his own. It reminds me of that kind of vibe. The Stickler, this is the most recent single. I believe it came out the same day as the album, in fact. Really special part on there towards the end. You've got John, Andrew and Will all doing their own screaming parts, and they all have their own tonality. So you get this really special part of all three guys who kind of contribute vocally to the band, like all kind of going back and forth and having this kind of call and response kind of thing going on. Like, absolutely stunning. Presentation wise, this is, as always for their studio albums, this is artwork drawn by Matthias Adolfsson. Phenomenal work. I absolutely love the work that he does. It's always so intricate and detailed, and it's kind of like a bit like a Where's Wally, where you kind of go back after years and you see things that you never saw before. The inside as well, like, absolutely stunning. I love how that looks. The sleeves, fairly basic in comparison, which is fine. You've just got the track titles and the lyrics, really simple there. But the main event for this presentation, I think, is the splatter. This is possibly my favourite splatter of all time. In fact, I will say it is my favourite splatter. Just look at that blue and orange combination. It kind of reminds me of like 2001: A Space Odyssey. It really does feel like you're flying down some sort of a tunnel, but the sort of faint hint of opacity that you kind of get when you shine it at the light, you can just barely see through on the coloured sections. Really phenomenal. Like, it does look on the face of it like it's on a black vinyl, but there's so much colour on there that through the light you get some really amazing sort of light patterns and stuff, and some of the blue bits really pop. This is one of my favourites, if not my favourite splatter. I love how that looks. So performance wise, unfortunately this hasn't done as well as the previous two albums, but I think it is a better album. I think that time, you know, having that longer gap between albums, having to kind of essentially take a step back and refocus on what they are as a band after such a big change, I think it's made all the difference. This is a phenomenal album. If you're not familiar with the band, this is a good way to start, actually. The musicality of it, it really does feel like they're on top of their game again, and I'm very excited to see what the next sort of few years hold for them. You know, this is their 20th year as a band, and to be still putting out something this strong and being able to kind of have this much energy to put into it, and their other projects as well, because they are busy guys. Yeah, like, what an achievement, what an album. I highly recommend it. Go out, definitely get yourself a copy. This is definitely in their upper echelon. This is one of their greats. So yeah, recommended. Love it. Cheers.